How's it going, everybody? I'm Officer Brush from Officer Brush Talks About Stuff, and today I am here to talk about Godsforged with Heather from Atlas Games. So I'll go ahead and let you introduce yourself.
Heather O'Neill. I am the marketing coordinator for Atlas Games and run all of the Kickstarters. So I get to be involved hearing about all the new fun stuff coming out from Atlas Games. And today we're going to talk about not just God's Forge, but the two new expansions as well.
All right. So, what is Godforge? Godsforge.
So God's Forge, we could talk about it in the game and talk about it in game world.
Yeah.
In game world, the God's Forge is kind of like this sacred area, right? And you are all spellcaster wizards, whatever you want to call it, dueling for control of that area. So that's what it is in the game. What it is for the gameplay is you are battling via playing cards that are basically spells or creatures that you summon by rolling your dice and then spending those dice. Is mostly what you're going to be doing. So it kind of has a Magic the Gathering feel, but a very light, approachable um, gameplay. And then it's got dice rolling and fun, action like that. So it's if you want the vibe of that without all of the prep and the struggle of the strategy, but you still get to have a little bit of strategy and tactics. That's the sweet spot for this game.
Okay. All right. And so the Kickstarter campaign is live right now, and you're trying to fund two expansions, correct?
Yep. So we did fund in the first day, no problem. And so we're about 300% of goal right now. So right, it was for two expansions, and we're actually doing an upgrade of the base game, which I believe came out in 2018, if I'm not mistaken. So just to kind of go over the gameplay again, we said, you're gonna have your creations, you're gonna have your spells. Well, the two new expansions add a ton of new cards. They each have 55 new cards that they're going to be adding in. So one is called Return of the Dragon Gods, which of course adds a lot of dragons and things and fire and stuff like that. And then the other one is Twilight of the Great Houses, and that adds these great houses that you actually can add to your character as like a special ability. Right. So it adds another layer of complexity to the base spellcasting duel part of the game. And one of the cool fun parts about this as well is you could play them both together with the base game. You could just play one, just play the other. So you could change it up. And each one of those also adds an extra player ability, like being able to have one more player. So usually it only goes up to four. If you play with one more, you could play up to five. One more, you could play up to six. So you could have this epic kind of battle struggle going on. So that has been in the works. Designer Brandon Stern had been working on that, and the plan was, let's get those out as the main focus, obviously, and then in preparation for the Kickstarter, getting a new quote for more copies of the base game. So the base game is great. But there was a few things that, over the years, people said, oh, I wish this was there. It'd be cool to have this. Or we thought, oh, it'd be cool to have this. So we did some upgrades to like the dice quality and the veil stones, which were like the currency. We found a couple of the cards, like the contrast wasn't quite there. It was a little harder to see. So some art upgrades, things like that. And it kind of ended up being enough changes and additions to what we wanted to make it a whole second edition, right? Change it up enough that way, but the gameplay isn't changing in any way, but just the actual components and what you're going to be seeing will look different.
Okay. I've
Yeah.
actually pulled open the kind of Kickstarter header that you guys had that
Yeah.
shows both expansions and the base game laid out on the table. And do you want to kind of, you know, just kind of go over exactly how one would like set up the game and stuff like that?
So the circle, little circle here, right? That's
Yep.
kind of going to be where this is representing kind of the God's Forge. That's out there in the middle, and you're going to have your deck of cards, and you're going to have these veil stones, right? Which are again, you can earn them by your dice rolls, and then you can spend them later to cast additional spells. So that's going to be the gems in the middle and the deck in the middle there. That's what everyone would be pulling from. And then you're going to have your own starting hand and your own set of dice that you're going to roll. Now, you have your starting hand, but unlike Magic, but I guess similarly to Magic, where you need mana to be able to pay for the cost. In this case, when you roll dice, if you've gotten numbers that match what you have on a card, so for example, it might be hard to see on that picture, but there's one that maybe says 3 and 3, or it says 5 and 2 evens, for example. So if you've got that in your dice roll of your 4 dice, or your 6 dice, you can do it. And in the original base game that we have out now, it's standard 6-sided dice with just the regular pips. This has them kind of more thematically done, like a spell. Still 1 pip or 2 pips. It's the same thing, but it just kind of looks a little bit cooler in this version. And then the black die that's kind of sitting in the front there is actually something that comes with one of the expansions. So it's kind of an extra die that you would get in the base. You would get with everything here if you got everything. So as you can see, this is like a mid state where there's already some cards played. One of the things that's interesting about this game is every time we're playing, each round that we're playing, or phase, or whatever you want to call it, we're all rolling at the same time, looking at our dice, kind of figuring out what can we play. And then when we reveal what we're going to play, we attack. And when we attack, we always attack to the left and we always defend to our right. So that simplifies a lot of the burden of tactical watching for other people's moves and things like that, like maybe a Magic game where you're playing with multiple people. In this case, you're always going to be attacking to your left and defending to your right. So there's only so much you have to worry about. So in the way of like 7 Wonders, you're looking at those two and you're not really worrying about the rest of the table as much. There's not much you can do to affect that in that regard when you're attacking. So it simplifies that part of it, at least, so that you can say, okay, I know I got to watch out because they keep coming at me with that big monster that they have, where I know, I have this special card, then I know I can always do damage to this person to my left. So that's kind of what's going to be happening there. And with the expansions coming in, obviously this could go up to 6 people. And there will be many different kinds of things that would be happening. But at its core, you would be rolling your dice, seeing if you've got any combinations of numbers or evens or odds, whatever the cards might say, to pay for that card, to cast that spell. Sometimes it's going to ask you to pay in Veilstones, which are the currency there. So you need to maybe play some cards that get you Veilstones so that you can then, use them later. So there's some planning ahead and comboing that can happen with this kind of stuff, of course. But basically, you're going to pick cards out of your hand, play them, and then attack and defend each round. That is at the core what you're going to be doing. And it just depends on what cards are in play, on the complexity of what else is going to be happening.
Okay. And how long does an average game last?
They're actually pretty quick. And again, in this version, it's only ever gone up to 4 players. We haven't played it a lot with 6 to talk about the time anyway. The playtesting has been done, but the time is slightly longer. But basically half an hour, you're pretty much done. And the reason is this is basically a last one standing, but it's not, I'm out first and I'm sitting here while you 3 play. As soon as this person's out, it escalates quickly, and you've kind of got your final moves to make to kind of control the Godsforge. So, I mean, yes, depending on analysis paralysis, or people looking at it and thinking a lot, it could take a little bit longer. But for the most part, it's going to be basically around a half an hour. When one person's out, it kind of just escalates, and eventually someone's going to pop in there and win. So that's usually what we say it is. Adding the 6 up to 6 player, maybe add another 15 minutes or so. Because again, you're still playing that same game. You're still playing a certain number of cards, getting a certain number of points to try to knock someone down, right? But as we know, with any game, whenever you add more people in, it takes longer, and there's more decisions to be made and things like that. So we're all playing at the same time, but there might be deciding, there might be, oh, we have to resolve this. So even with all six, I would say 45 minutes is really the max.
Okay. So we've talked about a little bit about the game, but let's learn a little bit more about Atlas Games as a whole.
Sure.
I
Yeah.
know that you work for them, so let's learn a little bit about the history of how it came about and just some more about that.
Sure. So I've been there about 2 years, so which is a very small portion of how long they've been around. I want to say it's been about 30 years, a little over 30 years that they've been in business. And they've done, of course, really popular game like Gloom, that you might have heard of.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that, hits probably everybody's table at once. They've also done a lot of storytelling and role-playing games since back then. So there's basically two divisions or two teams. There's like the role playing storytelling group, and then there is the board game card game type of group. So other really popular things that you might have heard about from back then would have been Once Upon a Time, which is card based storytelling. Definitely more on the role play story side than Gloom,
Mm-hmm.
being more of a board game. But kind of in that same realm. So it makes sense that Gloom was like a later game that they came out with. And then they also have done a myriad of other smaller games that you might have heard of, like Never Bring a Knife or Three Cheers for Master, Yukon Salon, Cursed Court is a little bit more of a heavier game that a lot of people really like. Um, let's see what other things. I'm going mostly board game here because of the crowd.
Yeah.
So all of course Godsforge. So all of these games kind of coming out over the last, 15, 20 years for most of those card and board games. And they just kind of search for the hits, find work with somebody who's either a great artist or designer that they know, or kind of pick up something that thematically matches what they do. So a lot of what they already do is witchy and magic and uh wizards and that kind of thing. So something like God's Forge completely makes sense thematically to be in it. But there's no game, they don't have any games with this type of style play,
Yeah.
right? So it would be a perfect fit for them to pick that one up. Um yeah, so they've kind of expanded that board game division a lot in the last 15, 20 years. And obviously have, I don't know, 8, 10 different Gloom versions and all kinds of expansions and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's been going on for a long time. Other people might, oh, Dice Miner, how to forget Dice Miner? Sorry, Dice Miner. Dice Miner being a really popular board game that has been doing well the last few years as well. So their focus is kind of more about like, okay, what's the theme? Does it fit like kind of what we like? And
Mm-hmm.
is this mechanic fun and interesting? And they don't need to be the most complicated 6-hour games like a Gloomhaven. It's more about getting it to the table, having fun, and having a good time, right? And it's more about like, is the vibe of that game fitting with what we like and what we do? So yeah, that's basically what Atlas's mission statement is. At least from the board game side. From the role playing game side, they definitely do get a little bit deeper with some of that stuff and doing things that are more, D&D 5e, and they started with a lot of old D&D, I think 3rd edition stuff
Mm-hmm.
when they first started putting out a lot of things. So they definitely get heavier into mechanics and things there. But for the board games, it's pretty much, these are going to be approachable games. So if you're like, I'm a heavy gamer, but I don't have other friends, that are heavy gamers, this is probably the perfect thing because you want that in between. This is kind of one of those in between where it satisfies people that like heavy gamers, but it's not so intimidating
Yeah.
that a novice gamer or a family member wouldn't be able to understand and wouldn't be able to play. So, and if you look at the hits of what I mentioned, that's Gloom, that's Dice Miner, that's Never Bring a Knife, that's Yukon Salon. They're very approachable games from a rules perspective, and they're also quicker games that you can get to the table.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how about you? How did you get started in the board game industry?
Yeah, that's interesting. It's a whole long story, but we'll go through it. We've got the time. So
Yeah.
I actually own another company that's a game company called Ninth Level Games, but way back in like I want to say 2006, 2007, I started getting a lot more into board games myself. My husband's always been a role player, designed role playing games, had this company that did role playing games, and I didn't really ever get involved with it. And then the more I got involved with things and started going to conventions and playing more games and things like that, around the time they were thinking about doing a new role playing game, I think around 2013, I was like, hey, I might want to design a board game. I started
Hmm.
thinking about this. So I kind of was working on that with another friend, and then uh my company kind of just started blowing up again. It kind of just was nothing was really happening for a long time, and we kind of decided we're getting back into publishing. And at that time, I was really into game design. So then I was like, okay, I'm in. I want to work. I want to get involved with this, and I want to get this game out, which was called Schrodinger's Cat. So that came out in 2015, and that was kind of the impetus to get me back in. So I've been helping in the background a little bit those couple years before that, but 2015 I would say is when I heavily got involved, started doing more of like the business end, doing more design, meeting more people in the industry, all of that. And then it wasn't really until COVID 2020 I was able to leave my full time job and work for my own company, but I wanted to supplement with something else. And I thought, why do a boring job from home? I would rather do a more fun job from home. So luckily, I was able to hook up with Atlas and take over their marketing and running their Kickstarters, since that's something I do all the time anyway.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where it all came to be. So we hooked up, and now that's what I do for them. So mostly it started with Kickstarters, and then marketing and social media and all that kind of stuff. So now I do all of that for them. Yeah.
That seems like it was a pretty exciting journey.
It was one of those things, like if you told me in like 2003 or 5 that I would like design a board game or own a game company, I would be like, what are you talking about? Like, no, would never have guessed that. But then if you
Yeah.
told me that in 2012, I would have been like, oh yeah, absolutely. But it was just not something I was thinking about at all. Um, so it was it was a cool journey and super fun to design the games and do that stuff. So um it just so happens that I have a marketing degree. I did a lot of project management at work, and those skills come in really handy when you're running a game company because you need, or marketing for a game company, because
Yeah.
those deadlines, and you've got to make sure uh all the cards are correct, and all editing, and get all the stuff to the printer, and make sure all the playtesting's done, and then make sure everybody knows about it and get the word out, and manage the Kickstarter and all that kind of stuff. So it ended up being definitely a fun way to use those work skills that I did not want to be doing corporate America anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so right now you're pretty much the one that runs most of their marketing slash like projects.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. So basically, we just had Weird Little Elf, which was a summer thing that just fulfilled its Christmas game. So anything that was coming out with that, I was doing it. So I don't have anything to do with the design. I might play
Yeah.
test some of the games, but right now and through COVID, they've had a lot of things in the pipeline for sure that we've been waiting to put out. So now it's kind of, oh, what's coming next? So it's kind of fun being there for 2 years and seeing like the stuff that was kind of sitting there waiting to come out, and then now them announcing new things that are going to be on the horizon. So this was one of them. I knew that this was coming a year ago. We were just
Yeah.
waiting, for everything to get done, the art to get done, be ready to actually go to Kickstarter with it and everything. So it's interesting. The whole,
Because the
like,
the
just kind of
goal
doing
is
the
that you guys want the it pretty much to be as streamlined as possible. The game's already ready to go to print. It's just a matter of we're just doing the crowdfunding now.
I mean, we don't have quite everything worked out, but we have it to the point, again, especially because of things kind of getting delayed during COVID. The designers had more time to work on it and play test
Yeah.
it. the artists had more time to work on the art. So by the time we're hitting launch, we've got all the art, we've got all the design, and the playtesting is done. The rules are written, and it's a matter of, okay, are we going to hit these goals to get these extra things that are bonuses? Are we going to be able to put those in the game? That kind of thing. And then once the game is fully through the Kickstarter process, be able to pretty much go right to print and, within a month after, so that we can hit quick deadlines. I mean, that's an ideal world, and we hope
Yeah.
that the delivery doesn't take forever. But that's kind of the process and the plan, when we can.
Yeah, and I guess what I really meant by that was that you guys aren't gonna get trapped by the scope creep that happens to a lot of people. You guys have pretty much this is what the plan was, and so
Yeah,
what you're seeing is what you're getting.
yeah. Especially in this case where it was a game that exists, for sure. But even on anything, yeah, we're pretty much going into this with a very clear plan of the product that it is going to be by the time the Kickstarter's done, or even before it starts. We pretty much know what it is. There might be some interesting things we're like, we never thought of that. It's a really good point. We should add that to the rules. There's something like that, of course, or,
Hmm.
it seems like everybody really wants dice bags, or whatever the upgrade is that sometimes that you don't think about. I mean, in this case, we did think of that, but sometimes you'll hear things, just by putting it out there. It's like a lot of the alpha board game people are on Kickstarter, and they're gonna have a perspective that maybe we didn't think about. So it's always good, I think, if we can, to get it out in front of people first before we go to print, and just something so simple as, oh, if you just did this instead of this, oh, yeah, you're right, we should have just done that, and we still have time to, so we will.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is great. Yeah.
So you talked a little bit earlier about how the new expansions, each one adds an additional player to the game
Right.
in that sense. But what other kind of quality of life changes did you guys find that changed from the previous edition to the second edition?
Yeah, there's quite a bit of things. I mean, the very first thing is the art itself. There was definitely just not in every case, a lot of the cards are fine, but there was just a contrast where you really could see it on the board. I don't think you'll be able to see it here, but it's not quite as bright as that would be. Like, you probably can't see what that number is, So there
Yeah.
was just little things like that that people had mentioned over the years that just needed a refresh. They just needed to be punched up. The cards themselves, we wanted them to be brighter, and again, a little more visible from across the table. So there's some enhancements going into that, and the artist kind of cleaning up a couple of things. So that
Yeah.
was one big thing we were working on. We also talked about the dice and the veilstone quality and changing those. So getting the dice to look a little different, a little more in theme with custom dice, making it clear what's happening in the game. And then the veilstones going to like a translucent type of material as well. Um, those were major things. And then while we were at it, it was like, you know what? There's been this comment about this one rule wording for years. Let's change that. So it's not that the rule change on the card, but maybe something everyone was confused about, or
Yeah.
whatever. So we took the time to say, okay, this is what people have said before. This is what the designer has been wishing to change. Let's go ahead and add that into the rule book, or change that card wording to make it a little clearer, because everyone always gets confused by that or something. So it took some time to do that. And then Atlas itself has really made like a um, commitment to being much more like sustainable and environmentally friendly over the
Yeah.
years. So any new products that's been coming out, they haven't been shrink wrapping it. They've been trying to use like the recycled paper, that kind of thing. This game kind of coming out before that, it still was shrink wrapped, and all that. So they were able to remove the shrink wrap, change the type of paper, I believe, and they're going to make the box depth a little bit thinner to save. There's like a plastic insert in there right now to save on
Yeah.
that, and to save on shipping costs and everything. It turned out it didn't need to be as big. It's a pretty thick game, and it doesn't actually need to be that thick. So it's going to be a little bit thinner. It's going to have a little bit more of that environmental consciousness into it. But then it's going to have a bunch of upgraded products in it. upgraded things in it, as compared to the if you were to buy it today. Again, exact same experience, gameplay is the same, and if you have the old one and you want the expansion, it still works. It's not going to ruin anything. It's totally fine. It's just so things that over the years we're like, if it's going to be 5 years later until this comes out, it's probably time that we update those. So that's kind of what we did. Was we were originally thinking about kickstarting this maybe a couple weeks beforehand, and when we forget who thought of it, but when someone thought of it and was like, we need to make kind of a whole new edition, maybe
Yeah.
August or September, it took that extra time to just get that prepped too, so that by the time we were going to Kickstarter, everything was known as to what's going to be in the new version. So yeah, it's gonna look cooler. It's going to be like definitely more visually appealing and even potentially easier to use with the rules and everything that you're going to be seeing. And it's going to have the cool custom dice, which will be neat. The expansions themselves actually come with dice and cards as well, so they're going to come with the same style that the new version will have.
Yeah.
So if you didn't have this at all, right, everything would match in the 3 boxes. Yeah.
Okay. And I've actually now transitioned. I have the actual Kickstarter page open.
Okay.
And so I'm just kind of looking a little bit. And so you got, how many different pledge levels are there? I see the $39 one.
4, I think. Yeah, well,
40.
there's a retailer level, so one is retailer level, so that's the last one. So there's technically 3 levels. So for the regular consumer, one is just the second edition, the new game. One is the new game, or sorry, one is the just the expansion, assuming you already have the game, and
Okay.
one is all 3. So then from that point, if you want to add on, I think there's a few add-ons you can do. Those can be done from any of the 3 base levels.
Okay.
Yeah. The one big thing that we did, you might be scrolling to that section now, is the very first stretch goal that we hit was to unlock solo rules. So that there's never been solo rules for Godsforge. So that was a big thing that the designer had been working on and really wanted to add in. So basically every other stretch goal approximately is going to be like a Nemesis solo deck list that you can play against when you're playing by yourself. So some of the
Okay.
decks listed currently that were the first few are for the base game. And then the next one that's going to be our next stretch goal that we hit in 20 some people, that one is specifically for cards in the Return of the Dragons expansion. And then there's going to be some that are for like the Twilight of the Great Houses expansion. So there'll be a bunch, if you have everything, there's going to be a bunch of ways you can play solo. And then they explain how you could make your own decks as well. So to play
Okay.
against.
Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing all of it, and I'm glad that you mentioned the fact that there's now a solo mode, because unfortunately COVID ruined a lot of people's French groups when it came to board games, and so
Yeah.
people have been looking for more solo material.
I agree. And, so it was a good idea, because you think, how could you play a battling game, a dice rolling battling game by yourself? Well, if you go against a deck, like an AI almost, right, of a Nemesis deck. So that's basically what the designer went ahead and said, okay, now you're playing the game. You're versus the game, and here is Nemesis deck 1, deck 2, deck 3, deck 4, and there's rules that will be, of course, in all of the game boxes, but they're going to be available just on our website, just a generic PDF of the rules of how to play. So if you've already owned the game, people will be able to play solo, and then new people coming in, of course, will have that as their option right off the bat.
Yeah, and that's the other thing about this, is that there's not really going to be a pledge manager for this kind of this project, right?
No, there really isn't. Atlas has found, maybe not so much right when I started, but somewhere right around early 21, their way that luckily they've been doing really well with getting projects out ahead of time of the next project. So right now, if you were to add on anything except for one RPG, it's all in stock at their web store. So rather than waiting 9 months or 6 months to get your copy of Gloom with this, right? Um, it just didn't seem worth like spending a lot of extra effort to do a million add-ons options because we have so many games that
Yeah.
like we'd have to offer every single game and it would take forever. So instead, we've just been saying, hey, thanks for backing. Here's our web store. We're going to give you a discount if you want anything else, because everything in this Kickstarter is what we're going to offer. And at the end of the Kickstarter, there's no more changes. That does not apply to retailers. Retailers are basically allowed to keep adding on because
Yeah.
they'll say, hey, that's my credit for $99 that I gave you, but I want to get 4 copies of Godsforge and not 3 or whatever. So that's slightly different, but that's a different animal altogether. So in this case, you're going to see, okay, I want to get the $79 level and I get the game, all 3 games in the dice bag. And you know what? I want to add on something. Maybe I'm going to add on these tokens, that kind of thing. You would be doing that, now or towards the end of the campaign. And we, of course, remind everybody, like, last chance
Okay.
to do that. Yeah.
And who came up with the art direction for this game? Because the art is very unique when it comes to most board games that you see.
That's a great question. I wasn't working there when this came out, but I do know that the art specifically internally we've talked about just how different it is, and like it really stands out because it's fantasy art but not in the same way you think of. I do know that the artist is also a tattoo artist, so I think that's why the art is slightly like just like can't put your finger on it, but that's why it's so
That
different.
explains that actually does explain a lot about
Yep.
it.
Yeah, so I don't know if it was Michelle, who's our graphic designer, or if it was the person who was the games manager at the time. I'm not sure who picked this artist, but I know that the reason that they went ahead with it is because it does look different. It's still fantasy, but in this like very different way. Plus, the coloration, the way that they colored everything, is not what you would expect. It's usually like browns and green and like navy or hunter green when you're talking D&D, or
Yeah.
wizards like blue and gold, not so much like teal and bright orange, and as I'm going through it's like bright red, bright teal, um and that kind of sets it apart. When you see that art, you're like, what is this? It's really cool.
Yeah, and it kind of adds it helps add to the uniqueness of the game when it comes to pretty much setting it apart from the others.
Yeah.
So I have one of the cards pulled up. I have Airship pulled up, and so you were kind of explaining a little bit about how the game worked. So if you want to kind of just explain some of the layout of the cards for somebody that's looking at this as well, how am I supposed to read this?
For sure. So obviously the top title is just the name of the card, the thematic name with the art piece below it. Then I believe at the top left, you've got numbers in there, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you can see that some of them do have like kind of like it's fire or it's earth or whatever. That's thematic to the game, but really it just means you need a 4, you need a 3, you need an even number, whatever it might say in there. It basically means what do you need to roll.
Yeah.
So thematically to the spell, it might be water or air, earth, but ultimately, did I roll a 4 and I need a 4? Yes, I did. Sometimes you might see where it'll say I need a 2 and a 3 and a veilstone, or I need 2 2s and a pair, something, or 2 or 3 and a pair, something else,
Yeah.
right? So similar to like the poker hands or Yahtzee type rolls is the kind of thing that you'd be looking for the more complicated cards. And then in the middle of the card, depending on which card you've got, there's going to be something that happens like every time you start a new turn. So upkeep is like the beginning of your turn.
Yeah.
So it'll say something like maybe like each upkeep you get this, or maybe it'll say each attack phase you get this bonus. Or it might say during the forge roll you can re-roll any die. It's going to give you an ability and it will tell you when to use that. And then it will have, if it's an attacking card, it will have like an attack symbol with a sword at the bottom,
Yeah.
which is damage. And then it might also have like just a defense one, which is like a shield, which I believe is blue. And it might say defends up to 10 or something like that. Or it might say pay extra stones to get +2 defense or something, or +2 attack. So
Yeah.
depending on the type of card, it's going to basically be there's a thing you can do every round, and then there is a attack or defense bonus on the card. Then there
Okay.
might be some cards you might have grabbed one that's they're kind of darker and they have like a spell kind of thing on them. Um, there's one here called Chain Lightning that I'm looking at, a Crystal Barrier, and those don't have an image of a creature. They have more of like a spell pattern on them.
Yeah.
Those it depends on the card. They're definitely much more different than the creatures are kind of always following that same pattern. But these might have very different things you can do that says something like, um you can do damage to your target and then the next person's target gets damaged from you as well, like a chain reaction. Or it might say if there's only one person left that you're against, you get to do this special thing. So they're much more situational, like spells, than summoning a creature that's always going to just do more damage or give you extra stuff. So you're going to of course have your hand. You're going to be debating what makes the most sense in the moment to play. But something that says each upkeep you get this, or each roll you get this, is of course good to play, because then every round you have those bonuses. Some of these the spells that might say something like, oh, attack double if there's only one person left in the game. That's awesome, but you can only do it once, right? And it probably costs you a good amount, but it's of course a very effective spell to use. So yeah, that's basically it. And of course, you're just trying to maximize what you've got in front of you that you can use every turn, and things that maybe, kind of combos or generators that say, oh, that's giving me more Veilstones. That's giving me extras so that I can then pay for this big splashy card that I want to
Yeah.
play to hopefully take my neighbor down.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, where are some places that they can go to learn more about Atlas Games? And obviously,
Well,
I'm going to put the link to the Kickstarter in this because it's live. How much longer is it live for?
it's 18 more days. It doesn't end until December 8th. So plenty of time to check it
Mhm.
out. And if you want to just go check out Atlas in general, it's atlas-games.com. And then on all the socials, it is Atlas Games. So searching that. Now, again, there's many new socials, so we're not on, Mastodon yet or anything, but like all the old school socials as of a week ago, we're on all of those. So yeah, feel free to check us out, follow on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook, or YouTube, of course. Also, while we're mentioning it, since this is also on YouTube, there's a playlist of Godsforge videos since the base game already existed from a few years ago, to watch how to plays, or unboxings and different reviews. There's also some really good, like, just 1 minute long, like, how to play videos, which I always find is great because you don't have to go through a 10-minute 15-minute play. They get through it really, really nice and quick.
Okay. Yeah. And you guys have some stretch goals planned. They're more for just extra nemesis decks at the
There's some
moment.
tokens. Yeah, there's some tokens. So there's not currently any tokens in the game, the base game, but there will be these tokens that are things similar to like in a Magic type game, where you create a token, you put it on this card. Like there's a doppelganger token now that got unlocked. There's going to be these Iron Wolf tokens that are going to be. So I think we just unlocked one today, and then there's some more planned as well. So there'll be some physical things like that, but the solo decks, which will be PDFs. We have a bunch of those coming, and then some other upgrades of the actual components of the game, even
Yeah.
more so than what I mentioned already.
Okay. And I know the usual questions people ask are, is this the word EU friendly is very loosely meant because it's more along the lines of, is it going to be shipped from within the EU for people that back there, more so than is it going to be shipped from the US, that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, Atlas also, another thing about Atlas is that they also have a very big warehouse, and they fulfill Kickstarters for many other companies. So they're going to be shipping directly from their warehouse in the US to everywhere in the world. But they
Yeah.
also do this all the time and have done this for huge companies and are have some very good rates. Now, sometimes we know that you're just not going to get the best rate ever.
Yeah.
But all of the estimates that were given, I think, were pretty reasonably, accepted. We haven't heard from anybody in the EU or Australia saying that that's ungodly. But yeah, in this case, it's a little different because they have been shipping out of their warehouse direct for years. Yeah.
Yeah. So they've got the knowledge on how to handle
Yeah.
that without it coming back and surprising people.
Exactly. They know how to do the duties and the customs and make sure that they've got everything for each country with the VAT and all that stuff. Yeah, they're very familiar with that.
Awesome. I know that's always one of those things people are worried about whenever it comes to projects, but they have to understand that this company's been around for a while. It's
Long time, yes.
it
And not only doing a lot for their own games. I mean, I don't know how many companies it is now, but it's at least 10, if not 15, that they do all of their warehousing for and do their website fulfillment and their Kickstarter fulfillments and all that kind of stuff. So they're very aware of how to ship things around the world.
all right. Well, I'm going to switch over to our ending in a minute, and I'm going to let you do a quick plug real quick on any other things that you could think about. And while you're doing
Sure.
that, go ahead.
Yeah, so in addition to Godsforge, which of course you should back, the other thing you should check out is our newest game called Weird Little Elf, which is a tiny, cute little package trivia game, but it's also like a hidden roles game where Santa's trying to figure out who's the imp amongst the elves, that everybody is supposed to be playing elves. And it's this really cute family game that, of course, with Christmas coming up, is like the perfect thing to grab one. I think it's only $12.99 or something. It's cheap, it's cute, and it's in stock right now. So I would suggest that as a gift for anyone that's currently out there thinking, I want a hidden roles game that I could play with my kids or I could play with my parents. It's very, very simple. So that would be my other plug for Atlas things right now.
All right. Well, let me go ahead and get us switched on over